Welcome the Flerlage twins, Ken and Kevin Flerlage.
Well, that was silly.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us here today. We're excited to be in the keynote stage again this year. We just want to say a big thank you to Tableau for giving us this opportunity. It's so exciting to be here in front of this big audience here. And we want to thank everyone joining us live on Salesforce Plus at home, as well as everyone who is here live in San Diego in this audience. Thank you very much for joining us today.
All right, how about some introductions? My name is Kevin Flerlage. This is my identical twin brother, Ken Flerlage. We run the website flerlagetwins.com, where we have 470 blog posts, and we celebrated 10 years together this year, so yay. We are consultants at Moxie Analytics, and we are 2 of 36 Hall of Fame Tableau Visionaries in the world, so great honor. Moxie Analytics is a small but mighty consulting firm led by our fearless leader, Serena Roberts, who's right here. We do all kinds of things: data management, data governance, and of course, data visualizations. We do all things Tableau. We build dashboards, we train. We have a beginner boot camp that is now self-paced online, and you can get the first 3 modules for free. I love the applause, yeah, thank you. Yeah, try before you buy, and then we do a advanced boot camp as well. That's live. If you're interested in our training, you can hit that QR code and see the full training schedule. All right, every year we get a selfie. All right, that's 23, this is 24. So, and last year, we would love it if you would join us in our 2026 selfie. Would that be all right? All right, let's do this. Okay. All right, act like you're having the greatest time of your life, right?
All right, thank you.
Thank you. All right, you want to see our first selfie ever on stage at Tableau Conference? Are you ready for this? It's not good. Yikes. I don't know what I was doing clinging onto that head of hair, and Ken has since got himself all shredded. How about that, right? Look at him. That was 2019, by the way. During that presentation, Ken was talking about how we were not competitive in any way. And while he said the words "not competitive," I put this up on screen. This is the ultimate favorites competition on Tableau Public, favorites on Tableau Public, and I think it's very, very clear that I am still way better than Ken, right?
Right.
Well, yeah. Ken is not Keith's favorite, clearly. He was pretty excited. Any chance that Keith gets to be able to make fun of Ken, he'll gladly take. Unfortunately, Keith wasn't able to join us this year. He's out promoting his new best-selling book, How to Know Ken Flerlage is a Dummy for Dummies. So he will not be joining us on stage this year.
The video wasn't enough?
The video wasn't enough, yes, sorry. We had to get one more shot in. All right, let's get to it. We're gonna do how to do cool stuff in Tableau. This is our 5th year doing this. Obviously, new tips, new tricks, new techniques. Those are my 2 cool dogs high-fiving, in case anybody cared. All right, we're gonna move fast. Please don't take notes. We're going to be on Salesforce Plus on demand, and then you can hit that URL, flerlagetwins.com/coolstuff2026 for all the related references, blog posts, visualizations, etc. We want to say thank you to an amazing community. A lot of our tips are our own. A lot of our tips came from other people. So we want to say specifically thank you to the folks on screen, as well as the general community in total. It's been very inspiring for all of us in our entire career. So thank you to everybody out there and the entire community. Couldn't be there without you. All right, with that said, Ken's gonna get us started.
All right. So I am going to start off with some cool stuff with tile or hex maps. How many people have created a tile or hex map at some point in time? Okay. Okay, so some people, this might be some totally new stuff. All right, so the traditional way of building a hex map has been this sort of external file here that has, we're just going to be focused on the US for now. We'll bring in some other geographies later, but this file that has each of our states and then columns and rows, right? And then we just sort of join or relate that together in our data model based on the state, right? So I'm linking Superstore orders to that hex file. And then we build it by doing something like this. We just drag columns up to the columns shelf, rows to rows. We throw maybe state, let's throw that on detail here. And then we choose a custom shape and we choose this hex shape here. Right, and then we can make this a little bit bigger so it tessellates nicely. Not gonna worry about getting it perfect here. And then we can put like a measure on there, and then maybe let's just throw state on label. Let's center that and make sure we show all labels, and then we have a hex map of the United States, right? We clean it up, we have a really nice little hex map. And that's pretty easy to do. But one of the problems with this is that external file, right? If you're working in a business, sometimes your company requires that you only connect to a database or maybe even publish data sources. So if we can find a way to sort of eliminate that external file, that would be ideal. So some folks in the community came up with this idea of, well, instead of bringing in that separate file, what if we just create calculated fields to give us those coordinates? So this data model here, we just have the orders data. We don't have that secondary file. And then we just create these two calculated fields, one for row, and it's just a big case statement that just gives you that row coordinate, right? And then we have the same for columns, and then we build it in pretty much the exact same way. We drag columns to columns, and then row to rows, and then go through the whole process of changing that to a hexagon. And it works perfectly without that external file, right? So this is a great method for doing this, super simple, but it has a problem when we put this on a dashboard. So here is this on a dashboard, and watch as I kind of resize this thing. It all just gets sort of squished, and those hexagons just stay the same size. So this is kind of a flaw of this. We have to jump back and forth between the sheet and the dashboard to get it sized perfectly, and I'm really anal about those spacing being really sort of perfectly even between those. So some folks in the community, of course, came up with a new method of doing this. So instead of using an external sort of Excel file with coordinates, someone built a spatial file. And this spatial file essentially just draws those hexagons for us. So we have a data source here with the spatial file. Let's take a quick look at that. And in this case, we're joining that spatial file, shape file, to our orders data based on state. And then in this case, because it's a spatial file, all we have to do is just double click on geometry. Let's turn off those background layers. Instead of checking all these boxes, unchecking all these boxes, we can just push washout out all the way. Then we drag, we're gonna drag our state abbreviation to detail, and let's put that on label as well. And then we'll put profit on color, and we have this beautiful hex map again. If we sort of clean that up a little bit, we have a hex map that looks just like the other one, right? But the huge advantage of this is then when it's on a dashboard and we resize this thing, it sort of automatically resizes all those hexagons. So solves that one big problem. But we've introduced another problem, right? We now have this external file again. So if we kind of just look at these different options here, we fixed the problem with the padding on the dashboard, and we've reintroduced the issue with that secondary data file. Now, again, you might have to be connected to a database or publish data sources, and then I found some problems with data sources that are cloud databases connected to a local spatial file. Sometimes there's some refresh issues. So I really want to eliminate that secondary file completely. So I thought, well, What if we just do something similar to what we did before? Let's try to create calculated fields instead. So we're going to go back to the data source that had those calculated fields, the row and column. Remember, this data source has no external file other than just that Superstore data. And we still have the row and column fields here. So what we're going to do is just force those into a spatial calculation. So we're going to create this calculation that just does a make point of that row and column. So this is now going to sort of be plotted as a map, just like that spatial file. So let's double click on this as we did before. It doesn't draw the hexagon, so we have to actually change it to a shape. Whoops, I need to put the state province on detail. So let's change this to a shape, and then we'll choose our hexagon shape. And then we can increase the size of these, of course. We'll put profit on color, and then we'll put the state abbreviation on the label and center those. And we have a nice hex map. Of course, we'll turn off the background layers and those kinds of things. But you might notice one little thing here. In fact, if I just increase the size just a little bit, it'll be more noticeable. The padding, the vertical padding is a little bit bigger than the horizontal padding. And I told you I'm anal about that. I want those to be exact. Now, what's happening here is actually two things. One, the main thing is that the hexagon is a little bit taller than it is wide. So it causes that sort of issue. Another thing is, when you're dealing with latitude and longitude, the distance between lines of longitude actually change as you get closer to the poles. So we just need to make slight adjustments to our calculated fields, and we'll do that here. We're basically just going to divide these things. All you have to do is copy these calculated fields. You don't have to understand exactly what it's doing. Just copy these into your workbook. That's the new row calculation, and this is the new column calculation, and then we'll put that into a new make point calculation. So when we use that on here instead of the other one, we get this nice even padding. And again, if we clean it up, we get, well, that's not cleaned up. But if we clean it up, we get a nice, good hex map, right? Okay, so back to sort of our requirements here. We've solved the problem of that secondary file. We've eliminated that. And we have this nice clean padding on the dashboard. But you can see there's a few more lines on my table here. There's a whole bunch of other advantages of this approach that I think are amazing. One is that spatial thing didn't draw the hexagons like the spatial file did, right? So we can actually use different types of hexagon shapes. If we want to use just different types of shapes, we can do that really easily here using a custom shape. Here's two sort of examples, this sort of jeweled thing and this scratchy thing. We can also use entirely different shapes all together with some slight adjustments to those calculations. We can do it as a square tile map, right? Excuse me. And because this is using spatial data, we can do multiple layers, as many layers as we want. So here's a hex map using 5 different layers to show year-over-year profit. That's probably a little overkill, but just to give you an example of using multiple layers to create this hex map. And then finally, if we have those sort of X and Y coordinates, we can do any sort of geography that we wish. Some folks have created Africa spatial maps or hex maps, Europe hex maps, and I've been able to use that method to create these nice little tile maps for Africa and Europe here. So ultimately, we get all these additional advantages of using this method. This is now my preferred method and what I would recommend for sure anytime you need to build a hex or any sort of tile map in Tableau. All right. Okay.
So just copy the calculation.
Just copy the calculation.
All right, perfect. All right, we're going to do some cool technique stuff today. If you've ever joined us for a Tableau Conference presentation, you've probably heard me talk about my dislike for stacked bar charts. We're going to talk about that again today. So we have a stacked bar chart. We can see the totals really well, chairs leading the way, followed by phones. And we could compare the standard class really well because they start at the same axis, at the same point. But if we wanted to compare, say, same-day shipping, it's really hard to make those comparisons because they don't start at the same point, right? So some people over the years have made some improvements to this. Steve Wexler, then Ryan Sleeper, allowed it to where we could parameterize it. So if we wanted to compare, say, second class, we could send second class to the axis and then we can compare those a lot more easily. That's using parameter actions. You can do this with set actions as well. But I still think that this could use a bit of improvement. So historically, what I did was tell them, take what's ever on color, throw it up on rows, and now we can easily compare all the first classes, all the same days, etc. And for some reason, this is broken already. So forgive me for a second. Well, this is, already messing up. It happens, I guess. Another little trick you can do is if you add a total and then you make a copy of what you're using on rows here, subcategory, or excuse me, ship mode, then you can make this total a stack bar. Okay, that's nice. But recently, somebody introduced something. Sebastian Amid introduced what I think is the best alternative to a stack bar chart that I've ever seen. And it looks like this. And what is so good about this is the gray is the total for each subcategory. And then we have the ship modes here. And then you can see that we can make comparisons across all of these different segments. I could compare all the different ship modes within accessories, or I could compare first class in accessories versus, say, same day in copiers, right? So I got together with Sebastian and Dara Murray, and we wrote a blog post, and it kind of went viral on social media. And let's go ahead and build this alternative. So we're going to start back here at the beginning. I'm going to control and move ship mode up here to rows. And let's do entire screen. Now we have our different ship modes. Then I got to create the total. We can do this two different ways, but I need these glasses. I'm old. We can do it with a window sum, a table calc if we like, or a fixed LD. So I'm just saying fixed on this subcategory, give me the sum of sales. So let's just throw this out on our view. We're going to get these bars here. Let's take ship mode off. Let's make this color like this light gray. I'm also going to give it a light gray border, and then we'll size it up, right? So you can see the grand total for each subcategory coming together. Let's create a dual axis. And how about devs on stage saying we're going to be able to do like as many axes as we want on the chart? Yeah. All right, let's synchronize. And then the gray's on top. So let's just change the order. You can see this starting to come together. There's a few things I don't love about it. Let's get rid of this. We don't need this. Whoop, I got to get rid of that one as well. I'd like for it to have a little bit of spacing, so we'll show another little trick here. I'm going to click on this. Oh, that's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to go up here to Analysis, Totals, Add Subtotals, and then we're going to click on this total and hit this little drop down. We're just going to hide it. We're going to do that with the gray as well. Hide that. And then let's format this and just get rid of this label here. And now we have this nice spacing between the different subcategories, so nice little trick. And with a little bit of labeling, we have what I think is the best alternative to a stack bar chart. I'm never going to use a stack bar chart ever again, because now we can make all these different comparisons all vertically across all the categories, all the subcategories, all the ship modes. So love it. All right, since we're talking about our disdain for stack bar charts, let's show another stack bar chart. So we've got, looks like sales by subcategory. And like I said before, I'd love to just sort of break this out. So this is nice. We can tell that binders and storage are selling a lot more than labels. But there is a problem here. Maybe I'm the category manager for labels. I'd sure like to see how labels are trending, right? So I could edit this axis and choose independent axes. And now I can easily see that trend for labels, right? But it is a little deceiving. If somebody opened this dashboard, it looks like the sales for labels are just as high as binders and storage. So I don't know that I really want to set up my axes like this. So what I tend to do in this situation is let the end user pick which option they want, right? So instead of me deciding, I'm going to just decide to keep them uniform to start, and then we're going to give them the option. So I've created a parameter, and that parameter has values of uniform axes and independent axes. okay? So we're gonna start off by first changing this axis to being independent. And then we're gonna look at this calculation. So I just called it axes type. We zoom in. Essentially what it says is when that parameter equals uniform axes, just give me sales. And when it's not, we're just gonna yield a null value. And what we're gonna do with this is feed it into our table, or into our chart as a reference line, okay? So let's just do that. I'm gonna throw this on detail. Then we're gonna add a reference line. We're gonna pick entire table, we're gonna pick that calculation, and we're gonna pick the maximum, okay? And you probably see what's happening here. To make it a little bit more obvious, I'm gonna make this, show this line, and you can see in each one of these, we have a maximum sum of sales fed into each. So each are about 29,000, right? So every time I have uniform axes picked, it's going to feed in that same reference line and synchronize those axes. So let's get rid of all the little stuff so our reference lines disappear. You can see it's still there. So we have a reference line here, and if we pick independent axes, it feeds in a null value, and we're able to zoom into that chart. So now your users can see it in context, and then also see the trending for each and every category. All right, a similar one here. We've got this line chart. It's showing year over year. The black line is current year. The gray line is the previous year. A little bit hard to see what's happening here, right? With line charts, they say you don't have to start them at 0, right? Bar charts always start them at 0, don't truncate. But with a line chart, you can do that. So we could do something similar to what we did before. We could uncheck include 0, and we kind of get a zoomed in view. We can now see the differences between one year and the next, right? But again, I think this can be deceiving. If we just open this, it looks like these things are at 0 and these are really high, and it really there isn't that much difference between the two lines. So let's do another thing just like we just talked about, and we will create a parameter. I've got one that says no zoom, which means the y-axis is gonna start at 0, and one that says zoom, where we're just gonna essentially allow the end user to check that box on their end, right? And this calculation is very similar to the one we just showed. If that parameter equals no zoom, then we're gonna feed in a reference line of 0. We're gonna do the exact same thing. Feed in a reference line of 0, otherwise we'll just feed in a null. So we'll start this by unchecking that. We'll put this calculation on detail just like before, and again, just like before, we'll add a reference line. Zoom calculation, doesn't matter the aggregation because the average is 0 and the max is 0 and all of them are 0. So now when we have no zoom selected, we fed in that reference line at 0, and it shows, with starting at 0. And if we pick zoom, it'll zoom into our chart and allow the end users to see the differences between those lines. So, all right, one more before we move back over to Ken. We've got this chart showing sum of sales over time, right? Humming along, looking really good, and my stakeholder is in an absolute panic because my sales just plummeted. What happened? Well, it's May 7th, and it's a partial month, right? This happened to me many times. Oh my gosh, what's happening in May? Well, it's 7 days, we're only a week into May. So there's a little trick that I like to call breaking the month, right? So what it is I'm gonna show you this calculation. All it is saying, is the month equal to the max month in our view, right? Just a true false. Is my month in my view equal to the max month in my view, all right? So we're gonna get a true for this value and a false for all these other values. So watch what happens when I put this on to detail. It's going to break that line. Boom, you see how it broke? If we put this on color, put it on size, clean it up a little bit, we have something that looks like this. So very obvious to end users that last month is very different than the other months. And if we add a little bit of tooltips, we can see, hey, this is 14.6 thousand in sales, and this is, hey, partial month, and we have 3.1 sales to date. A little bit more flair, you can use a dual axis with a dotted line, you have something like this. But this is a really great way to tell your end users, hey, this last month isn't quite where it needs to be because we're in a partial month. Don't panic yet. So, all right, Ken, I'm gonna pass it back over to you.
All right, where am I here? Not there. I got a weird section here for you. Cool stuff with clearing selections. So you're probably wondering, what in the world is he talking about? Well, let me just show you what I mean. Here we have a bar chart, and I've got parameter action on this that when I click on one of these, it's gonna change the color of that mark, right? So you can see it changing into purple, but the rest of these bars get really sort of light. You can see it really good on this screen here. It's even more, you can even tell even more so with a black background how these all sort of turn white, right? Now, I've told it what color I want it to be. I don't want it to do this weird highlighting thing. And so that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about clearing the selection. And our community has spent probably way, way, way too much time trying to solve this problem. The first technique I'm going to share is one by Brian Moore, and the same Brian Moore you saw on stage yesterday. Can we just get a big hand for Brian, Kevin Wee, and our champion, Ann Pregler from Iron Bridge yesterday? Amazing, amazing work. Right, so Brian Moore found out this little hack for sort of this, what he calls a fake highlight. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna create this super complicated calculated field, I'm calling fake highlight, that is literally just an empty string. It's nothing but an empty string, right? We're gonna take this, we're gonna drag this onto the detail card. You can see it here on detail. And then let's switch over to our dashboard. Let's create some actions. So we already have that parameter action that's setting the subcategory so that we can change the color. We're gonna create a new action, a highlight action. And this highlight action is just going to highlight based on that fake highlight field. Now, you're probably wondering why we would do something like that. Nobody knows. We don't know why we're doing this. But when you implement that on the dashboard, it automatically clears that highlight for you. No idea why it works, but it does. Now, if you look really closely here, you can tell that mark, that purple mark, is still highlighted. Or still selected. There's a little black outline. In fact, let's zoom in a little bit, and you can see that black outline. So there are cases where you want to make sure that selection is entirely cleared, right? We just want to get rid of that selection entirely. So our community, once again, found a solution for this, particularly Yuri Fowl. If you've ever asked any questions on the community forums, it's very likely you've ran into Yuri. Yuri came up with this method, so he created two calculated fields, one called false with the value of false, and one called true with, of course, the value of true, right? And then, once again, he drops those both on the detail card, as we can see here. Then on the dashboard, we create not a highlight action, but a filter action. And the filter action looks like this. We're taking the source field true and feeding it into false. And, well, why would we do something like that? Nobody knows. But when you do it, you implement that, it automatically clears that selection entirely. We don't get any of that highlighting, and the mark selection is cleared. And there are some very specific scenarios where you might want to be able to do that. Okay, so this clearing selection can also be really useful for bands. And the typical way of building bands in Tableau would be we drag our pretty much everything over to the text card, and we use a text mark like this here. So we're showing quantity, sales, and profit. Then we throw that on a dashboard, and it works and looks pretty good until one of your users clicks on this thing, and you get this big blue mark. And I've had end users be like, oh no, I broke it, right? What's this blue thing that I just created, right? So we would like to just clear that selection in order to get rid of this blue mark. So one sort of simple way that you might be able to do this is just use a blank. Just load a blank over this, and now I can't click on it at all, and so that issue goes away. But sometimes I like to have things in the tooltip. I might have additional information, maybe a definition of that particular metric. So with this, I can't interact with that at all. So I thought, well, what about that Yuri Fowl method? That method should work, right? So I implemented that here, and with the Yuri Fowl method, it works perfectly on desktop. On the web, it's a little bit awkward. You get this sort of weird flashing yellow and blue, and it ultimately clears that selection, but it's just a little bit of an awkward UI. And I had some trouble with this on the web as well. So typically what I do these days is use one of Kevin's favorite techniques, a transparent shape. So what is a transparent shape? Imagine just an image that is just filled completely with transparency, with no actual color, just 100% transparent color. So what we're going to do with this is change this to a shape, and then we'll select our shapes, and I've got a folder in here. Where is it? Transparent Ken, and you can't see it, but there's a little transparent image there. We click that. That image goes away, and now on a dashboard, it still selects those, but you don't get that big blue or any of that yellow stuff. And you can see here we can get our nice little tooltip. So this is traditionally my method for clearing the selection on bands. It works really, really great.
They clap for my tip. Just yeah.
All right, so we're going to switch gears slightly here, and we have this beautiful dashboard. This is actually based on something Kevin built, and it shows for each of our subcategories the year, 3 different years of data, right? And you can specify whether to show 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years in this little dropdown. And this is a beautiful dashboard. And I would like to have a nice UI for selecting these buttons instead of these parameters. So I'm going to show you how to create these using buttons. So first of all, I need some data to fill these, to create these buttons. So I've got some data here in my data model it's called just a field year option with 1 year, 2 year, and 3 years, right? And then I'm just going to create these buttons by dragging that year option up to columns and onto the text. We get something like this. We change that mark type to bar and just fill it in this blue. We get something like this. And then finally, we're just going to create a calculated field that says, is the value what's equal to what's in my parameter here? So when I change the value in the parameter, it switches these. The selected one is going to be this dark blue, and everything else is going to be white, right? So this works really well. We now put this on a dashboard. We create a parameter action. So parameter action to just select that start year, right? So as I click on one of these options, it's going to send that to the parameter, and that sort of controls everything in the dashboard. And now, which we can watch as we click these, it will automatically update those to 1, 2, or 3 years with a really nice UI. But I don't know if you can see it on that screen. I made those buttons white, right? And they're gray. So here we're dealing once again with that little automatic highlighting thing that Tableau does. Now historically, when I've tried to fix this problem, I haven't been able to get the fake highlight to work. I've struggled a little bit with the Uri-Fal method. So traditionally what I've had to do is this kind of complex thing where we're switching the data. And I'm just going to show this kind of quickly. So what we do is we take that year data and we join it or relate it to another data set that just has values 1 and 2, just the switch field 1 and 2. We do the union or do the relationship on 1 = 1, so that's a cross join or a cross relationship. Essentially, the important thing is no matter what value, if I filtered to switch value 1, the year options remain unaffected. If I filter to switch value 2, the year options still remain unaffected. And that's going to matter here in a moment. So back to our buttons. We've got our sort of working buttons here, again, with the problem with the highlighting. What we're just going to do is take the last thing I wanted to mention was this next switch. So this is just a calculated field that just gets the opposite value. If it's 1, it'll be 2, otherwise 1. Right? So we add that next switch to the detail card. You see that sort of breaks our buttons here. But what we're going to do is create an action that switches these values. So we're going to take the value of next switch and feed that into the value of switch. So if switch is 1, next switch will be 2, and vice versa. So why do we do this? Just kidding, I know why we do this. We're just swapping the value of switch. So watch what happens. Watch in this filter area as I click this, it creates an action filter, it changes it to 2, and then it'll change it to 1, and then back to 2. But the buttons themselves remain unaffected, right? all this is doing is forcing that sheet to filter, and that act of filtering a sheet automatically clears the selection. So this is a very versatile method, probably the most complicated method we'll be sharing, but very versatile. It works in almost every one of these scenarios, that sort of swapping method, because it's sort of forcing that sheet to filter. So again, historically, that's been the only way I've been able to get that to work with those buttons. I figured, we can, yeah, and of course, let's see this in action here. You can see it remains white, and I'm much more happy than having that sort of highlighting issue there. But I thought, well, let me try, what if I try the URI-FAL method here? I tried that, I implemented that on this button. You can see our true and false, and then I created the actions on here, and on desktop, it works perfectly. I tested this on the web. It also worked perfectly there, but I just will warn you, I've had trouble with that on the web. It's a little bit inconsistent, so I would prefer to use something a little bit more foolproof. And then, of course, Kevin came in and came up with a simpler solution than everything that I've shared before. What he did is just created a set of these buttons with no text on there, and he's using that transparent shape, right? Because when we click that transparent shape, there is no really anything to select at all. So on the dashboard, what we're gonna do is we're just gonna take that transparent thing that he created, here it is right there, we're just gonna sort of float that over top of the existing buttons. We hook up our parameter actions to work based on that as well, and now when I click on this, there's no selection, and it automatically just shows everything in the background as we wish. So that, I think now is probably the simplest method for doing this, and that is until I found this really one weird trick so I'm gonna show you this one weird trick I discovered that I have no idea how or why this works. We're gonna go back to our buttons. Remember, this is just the simple button setup. We've got year option on columns, and we've got it on text. And I'm just gonna duplicate this. So I've created a duplicate. Calculation is just a duplicate of that year option. And then on text, I'm gonna change this to that copy, or on columns, and then on text, I'm gonna change it to the copy. And then when I implement this on the dashboard, it automatically clears the selection perfectly without any of all those other crazy tricks. And why does that work? Nobody knows. All right, so just wrapping up this with what to use and when. Well, ultimately, just use the simplest method that works for the particular scenario you're working with. If it's just typical marks on charts, use the Brian Moore or URI-FAL method. For those bands, I think using the transparent shape mark is the easiest and simplest. For those menu buttons, I like Kevin's floating transparent shapes or that one weird trick, although I'm a little suspicious of whether that will work long term. I'm sure it's a bug somewhere that they will fix and make it go away. And one thing I didn't mention is these sort of on-off toggles. If you need to do that, pretty much the only method that's going to work is that data switching method that I showed with the action filter. And with that, back over to Kevin.
All right, thank you. So the toggle thing, Ken, we may or may not have a blog post coming out
I forgot
next
about
week
that, yes.
that tells you a better way of doing that. So look for that. All right, we're gonna wrap it up with some cool random tips. Let's start off. This one happened to be stolen by Kat Rocha in the tip battle, so if you saw that, shout out to Kat. So we have this very complicated chart. We've got these complicated calculations, and there's a lot of calculations, right? But I need to edit the color here. I need to fix this color calculation. So I'm gonna have to find it in here. So I'm just gonna copy this and we'll paste it. Oh shoot, we got the backs thing, the brackets on there, and there. Now we can find it and edit this calculation. Or we could just right click on this and choose find in data pane. It'll go right to that. So very handy little trick. I just discovered this like 3 weeks ago, so really handy, use it all the time. Tableau last year introduced a new feature. I figured I'd share it with you because I love it. So we got these containers showing all the different regions across in our regional sales scored. If I come over here to layout and scroll down, start looking at the padding options, what's this other padding option? Well, it's rounded corners. If I add 20 pixels, we can see we now have rounded corners on our container. So really nice UI. Okay, here we have the months of the year, the last 12 months. We're showing some value, doesn't matter what that value is, and then I took a table calculation to show the percent difference from the prior month. So we can see, well, May 2025, we have a value of 5, and there is no percent difference because there's no month prior. Okay, and then all these seem to be working properly, and then we get down to February, it shows no value either. And why is that? Well, it's trying to look at a value of a previous month of 0. And we all know thou shalt not divide by 0, so we get a null value. So these null values are just showing up as nothing. This is really confusing to an end user. So I'd love to be able to fix that, and maybe we'll feed in a value of NA or something like that, right? So we could create a calculation to do that. I could just take this table calculation and drag it in there, and then I'll say, if that big thing is null, then give me an NA, otherwise just provide a null value. We don't want anything. And then we could drop that on our text card, right? And of course, now I gotta go fix all the stuff because it's on 2 lines, and we don't have room for it. And we back that up, put it in here. And then, okay, now we're showing NA, and this makes sense, a lot more sense to an end user. But how about we don't do any of that, because that's too much work. I'm always about efficiency, so let's back up. We're just going to instead just right-click on this table calculation and choose Format. And then we see down here where it says Special Values, e.g. nulls. In this text, I'm just going to type NA, and when I hit Enter, it's going to replace any null values with an NA, so we don't have that weird blank for our end users. All right, shout out to Brittany Rosenau and Zach Bowders for this one. We don't mention everybody's names, but I love this so much. When I build a dashboard, I almost always build some sort of how to read panel. I typically do it with a collapsible container. So we have this container with a button, and if I press that button, it has this overlay, and it tells you how to read this complicated chart. It doesn't have to be a complicated chart for you to want to be able to tell your end users how to use it, right? So, and then they just hit the close, and it closes it, right? So how did I create that? Well, I go into my favorite image editing tool, PowerPoint. I drop in a background image, and then I start drawing stuff, right? So maybe I put a little container out there, type some sort of instructions, and then I'll format it, make it look nice and neat, and then maybe I'll copy that and do some more instructions and do some more instructions and maybe add some leader lines, right? And in the end, we get something like this. We get rid of that background image, and then we take the whole thing, select it, and save it as an image, and we bring that image into Tableau, right? But you move one thing on the dashboard, and now you gotta go back into PowerPoint and rebuild that entire image, right? And honestly, most of us don't own our dashboards for eternity, and you want the person that takes over your dashboard to have to go do that same thing. So it would be really nice if we could just build it all in Tableau. So let's build it all in Tableau. All right, we're gonna start off with just a sheet. It's just got average of 1 on columns. I'm gonna get rid of this axis. I'm gonna use that handy transparent shape instead of the bar. Transparent shape. I use it so much, I've got it here at the top. So now this sheet is basically just empty sheet with nothing on it. Let's go back to our dashboard. I'm gonna open up this container, and let's find this sheet. There it is. I'm gonna drag it into this container, so this is gonna be horizontally aligned. The sheet, this image sheet, we don't need anymore. We do have a faint title here. Let's hide that. So now what we can do is build our overlay right here in the sheet by right-clicking, choosing Annotate Point. We type instructions. I'm going to misspell it. Not really worried about that. Instructions, and now we have a little arrow pointing to how we want to instruct the user to use it. do it again, right? And we can keep building this and building this and building this, and we can do it on the fly. If you adjust something in your dashboard, you can move it around, and it works just like the other one. Instead of closing and opening and closing an image, we're opening and closing that sheet that has that nice overlay. So really nice trick. I love this trick because it's something Ken didn't know, so I like to always rub it in his face if at all possible. Ken's been using Tableau longer than me, so he knows almost everything. He knows more than I do, but this one he did not, so I feel proud. All right.
He originally had a whole section called things that Ken don't know, you guys didn't know.
I scrapped it. All right, we got region, we got category, we have subcategory, and then we have sales and quantity. I always found this weird. For our dimensions, our headers are on top, our measures, our headers are on bottom. I felt like that just wasn't really easy for the end user, so I always want to be able to fix that. So let's do something. Let's actually take this and create a dual axis. I'm gonna hit Control and just duplicate each of these pills. I hate when I do that. Let's just go back here. We're gonna just hit Control and create dual axes. So let's dual axis this, dual axis this, then we'll synchronize both of them. Okay, good. And then theoretically what I could do is just right click down here and uncheck show header and we'll be good to go, right? Nope, it gets rid of both of them. So that's not gonna work. So the way to get these headers all the way across the top is just sort of hack it. And so we're gonna edit this axis. We're gonna delete the title. We're gonna come over here to tick marks and hit none. Let's do the same thing over here. Delete the title and click none on the tick marks. And then up here, we'll just get rid of the tick marks. We got the labels directly on the bars, so we don't need any tick marks. And with a little bit of cleanup, we can stretch this up and we'll just show the final. We now have all the headers at the top and we don't have to go to the bottom to see which each of these measures are showing. And you can sort and do everything that you normally would be able to. You will have a little space down here, so keep that in mind. You'll have that space there, but you can't see it, but it will create that space when you drop it on a dashboard. All right, this one's kind of weird. There's a couple weird ones coming up. What I want to do is create this list parameter ranging from 0 to 1,000 in steps of 10. Ultimately, what I want it to do is look like this, right? All right, so how are we gonna do that? Well, I could create a parameter and we have a few extra minutes, so let's just, no, we don't want that, we want integer, so let's just do this. 10, 20, 30, 40. You guys don't want to do this with me? Okay, no, we're not going to do that. All right, we could do that. We'd be here for the next 10 minutes and everybody would be bored out of their skull. We don't want to do that. So we're going to do something different. Instead of a list, let's change it to a range. And we'll set ours to 10 to 1,000 in steps of 10, right? So now we have this range parameter. Let's show the parameter. And it's not exactly what we want. Remember, we wanted a list, but we now have the slider. These sliders are pretty hard to use, I think. You know, if I want to pick, say, 500, oops, I did not do that on purpose, I promise. So I want to pick 500. It takes a little time to get to what we want. It'd be nice if I could just hit the drop down, okay? So what we can, in fact, do is if we edit this range parameter, it's a range parameter, it's got the slider, and we have all this set up, and we now just click list. It now creates a list parameter with all those values in it, yeah. So we can show that, no longer a range parameter, now a list parameter with a range. I love this one, so hopefully you clap for this one. So the goal here is we have this date range. We're looking at the trailing 12 months, May 1st to April 30th, and I want to keep like a range. I want somebody to be able to pick a date from a date filter, and it only allow them to look at that particular range, right? So we could, in fact, create a range parameter on a date. And what I've done is just feed in dynamically feed in these dates, right? Again, May 1st through April 30th. And when we have this range parameter, you can see May 1st through April 30th, I have the steps in one day. And now we have this, this range parameter. Of course, I can't pick before that date, that beginning date, or I can't pick after the end date. That's nice, but just like the other situation, what if I wanted to pick January 1st? Oh shoot, I completely missed. And then I have to like clicking it 7 times.
And the dashboard's refreshing.
Yeah, the dashboard's refreshing every time I click. It's just not a great experience. So what I'd love to do is use a calendar picker, right? So we have a calendar picker here. I'll just show you this parameter. All I've done is create a date parameter and allowed all values. Okay, so now I can go pick any date very easily, very intentionally. But what's the problem with this? Well, I can go pick any date into the future. I'm not limited by this date range. I want a calendar picker where I can also be limited to the date range. And we can, spoiler alert, do that. So what we're gonna do is take that calendar picker, remember calendar picker, I can pick any date. We're gonna edit this. We're gonna leave it showing on screen. Don't hide the parameter. That is the key, right? And then we're gonna set this to a range. We'll feed in those values, dates. So now you can see a range. It's theoretically a range parameter with limited min and max dates, but since we left it on our view, it's now a calendar picker. I can pick those dates, but I cannot pick anything into the future. In fact, you can even see the forward thing on the next month is grayed out. So you now have a calendar picker with a date range limit. All right, one last tip. This came from Danushki De La Vera. I don't think she's here, but thank you, Danushki. This is really cool. I think it's really cool. Got this bowling dashboard. I built this for my local high school bowling team. And you may have seen this before. We've shown this before. So I have this dashboard, and this sheet has a filter on it that I want to apply to all the different sheets on the dashboard. So let's go to that sheet. For some reason, this sheet takes long to load. It's called match number. I want to be able to filter this dashboard by the match number. So I'm going to right click on this. I'm going to apply to selected worksheets. And then, well, shoot, there are a lot of sheets in here. Which ones are on my dashboard? How do I know how to apply them? So what I go do is go and hide all the sheets on the dashboard and like scribble down notes, apply to this sheet, or maybe I use color coding or something like that, or I rename all the sheets. So there's a much easier way that I never knew was possible. So let's go back to the dashboard. Instead of applying the filters from the sheet, let's do it from the dashboard. So I'm going to go to the sheet, choose filters, and choose match number. It's going to drop it in some random location. Let's drag this out, and I'm just going to change the background color to white just so we can see it. And then we go to this filter and click the little drop down. Remember, this filter only applies to this sheet right now. We're going to pick this little drop down, select apply to sheets and selected worksheets. Watch what happens. I've never noticed this before. There's a button that says select all on dashboard. Click the button, hit OK, and you've now applied that filter to every single sheet on the dashboard. That's it. That's it. Thank you so much. Again, this is on Salesforce Plus. You can get, thank you. Thank you. You can get all the related content at flerlagetwins.com/coolstuff2026, including the workbooks, blog posts, etc. On Tuesday, last Tuesday, we did an interview with Tableau. We did bonus tips. Every single tip came from a community member because our community is the best in the world. So all those tips came from community members. Go check that out on Salesforce Plus. And there's an Ask Us Anything, and they embarrassed us a few times because we couldn't answer some of their questions. But with that, we thank you very much and really appreciate you having us here at the Keynote Hall again. Thank you. Thank you.